So tonight I'm talking about the carte de visite, the little photographs from the 1860s, the cabinet cards, which are the bigger ones, that size, from about the 1870s, 80s, 90s, and then the albums they came in. I do have some carte de visite albums up here you can have a look at later. So, yeah, I guess my name's Debra, and for those who mightn't know me, and when I studied conservation I got really interested in old photographs, like 19th century photographs, and I started collecting a few different ones. That's why I've got albums. I've got more albums than that, which you'll see in my presentation. Anyway, I'm going to start off with a brief introduction to photography. Maybe that here doesn't work. How do I forward the slides on this, Tim? Not that?
No, it should be the...
Technical problems already. Yep, so I need to click on that.
Yeah, it should be right.
Right. So, the first photograph was taken in 1827 by a Frenchman, and who can pronounce that name for me? Anyone speak French?
Joseph.
I meant the second two parts. So he took a photograph with a camera obscura, and that had been around since very early times, 15th century or something. But they'd never managed to get those images in the camera obscura onto a piece of paper or glass or whatever. So he took the first one with this exposure, and this is it. It was an 8-hour exposure, so the sun went from one side to the other, so there's kind of shadows on both sides. So that was the beginning of photography. It is right. So the first commercial photographs were daguerreotypes, and they were invented by another Frenchman named Daguerre. That's where we get the word daguerreotypes, from Daguerre. And Daguerre had contact with Nipsey, whoever's French. Joseph. So Louis Daguerre did have contact with Joseph, and so he learnt things from him, but he was the one who produced this daguerreotype. So the daguerreotype is a photograph on a copper plate, and you can't really tell it's on a plate because it's all in a case. They were almost always in a case. So the copper plate was placed in the camera, and you got a single positive image. That wasn't the negative and then a print to a positive. It was a single positive image direct onto that copper plate. So it was a one-off process, and copies couldn't be made. And because they were quite vulnerable, they were put in this case. They had a piece of glass on front, then they had that little decorative gold frame, velvet in the case to rest on the glass. And then at the start, those little cases were covered in leather. Later on, they were made of an early type of plastic, especially in America, these case photos with this, where they pressed the plastic into a mould and you got all sorts of decorative effects on the cases. But I don't think I've got a picture of one here. That's a bit unfortunate. So that was 1839, and the first daguerreotype studio did open in Sydney in 1842. So only 3 years later, which is quite good, yeah. So it was a hinged lid, and it closed up, and you had a little clasp to keep it closed. So then we come to William Henry Fox Talbot, who was an Englishman, and when he heard that daguerreotype had published that he had produced this photographic technique, Fox Talbot had been working on his photographic inventions for many years, and then he suddenly saw daguerreotype had done something, so he thought he'd better publish something as well. So he announced his calotype process in 1839, so just after Daguerre. And his process is what then became the common photographic method, where you had a negative, and then from that you could print as many positives as you liked, until we got to digital. So Fox Talbot is considered to be the father of modern photography before 2000, I guess. That sort of modern photography. So yeah, Fox Talbot had produced a negative in 1835, but he had never published that information out, so that's why it wasn't until 1839. And there's the first negative, his little window there. It's quite small, that little negative. So then we get to André Disdéry, another Frenchman. So it was the French and the English that were doing a lot of these inventions. I mean, I'm sure in Germany and other European countries there were people working on it, but these are the main ones, the French and the British in this early time, and then of course the Americans did a lot of those daguerreotypes, that sort of thing.
Is this the glass?
So André Adolphe Disdéry was a Parisian photographer, and he had been in contact with, I don't know why my notes come up different, sorry. He was also in contact with Nipsey Joseph, and he at first Disdéry produced daguerreotypes using that method, and he also produced Talbot types, which was by William Henry Fox Talbot. So Disdéry used a number of methods. But then he produced, about 15 years after that first introduction of daguerreotypes, Disdéry patented the production of several small exposures on one glass plate. So you had standard glass plates, maybe this kind of size, and then half plates, that sort of thing. And normally you'd have one photo on it. But Disdéry did this effect of putting, I'll better go to the next slide and then you can see 8 images on one glass plate. And then also they would do is up to 16 images on one glass plate. So you can imagine they'd be quite small. So he's carte de visite, so French, because he was French, that's why we get this word carte de visite that we call these little photographs, which are the ones in these little albums, like this. Yeah, quite small. So they're carte de visites. So it was just 15 years after that invention of photography that he patented this small exposures on a standard glass plate. But it wasn't until 1859 that they became popular. And this is when he produced these cartes de visite for Napoleon III. And after he produced those and people got to know, oh, there's these ones of Napoleon III, it suddenly became a very popular photographic method.
When did they come out here?
Pardon?
When did they come out here to Melbourne, do you know?
Just wait for the next few slides. It's coming.
Sorry. Oh.
It's coming, it's coming.
No, I've seen a few of them, that's all.
Oh, okay, so because they were quite small and they were always adhered to a piece of card, and that piece of card was kind of the size of a visiting card at the time, so they got the name cartes de visite. So here we see the 8 images on one full glass plate, and this standard full plate size was 16.5 centimetres times 21.6 centimetres, whatever that may be in inches. So originally he took multiple negative images on one glass plate, so you can see there are different images on that. So they would put the plate in the camera and then move it along and take different photos on the one plate. But then later on they had cameras with like 4 lenses or more, and you would just get the same image like 8 times instead of different images. So this method, you know, people could do different poses, but with these later methods, you could just get multiple copies of the one photograph.
Debra, do you have any idea how long they had to hold a pose back then?
Oh, it was maybe a few minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't like Joseph's 8-hour exposure.
No.
Yeah, but it would have been a few minutes at the time. Definitely a few minutes. So in 1857, carte de visites were introduced to Britain, but as in France, they weren't popular until Queen Victoria had her photograph taken. So here we have Queen Victoria with Prince Albert. Yes, that's his name, isn't it? So after that, these were published in 1860. These cartes de visite became very, very popular. So of course, if royalty's on it, well, everyone wanted to go and have their own photo taken and be on one like Queen Victoria was. So initially they were used in place of visiting cards, but quickly they became more widely used and they started to be collected and swapped. So that was a big, big craze at the time to collect them. So with the popularity of photography and these carts, studios quickly increased in number in Melbourne and across the country. Early carte de visites were mounted on thin card which had square corners. So this, you can see here, these card had square corners and a small little logo for the photographer on the back. So here on the left we see I. van Berkelaar in St Kilda in 1864. And then this Alexander McDonald studio, I couldn't work out the date for that one, but it looks quite early. So yeah, it wasn't long after they were popular in Britain that studios were opening in Melbourne and Sydney, and of course. Oh yeah, so no, the Alexander McDonald one is between 1864 and 1869, so just in that period. Because he changed, you can work out these dates from the address they had on the cards, because they often change premises quite a lot. And there's a nice book where you can go and look. Well, when they were at St George's Hall, yeah, what date were they at St George's Hall? 1864 to 1869. So they were basically produced from 1854 to 1919, but were most popular in the 1860s to the 1890s. So in the 1880s, even 1870s, you got the larger photographs, the cabinet cards, and so they were bigger and they became more popular, and then so the popularity of the cartes de visite waned then. So as I said, they were a big craze to collect these. And as you can see in one of these albums, I've got an album of the famous people in royalty. There's everyone from Charles Dickens to Lincoln and all different royalty across Europe. So it's very, very popular to buy these ones of royalty, like we might buy a postcard with royalty today. So yeah, they became really, really popular. So you might have a family album and there'd be some famous person, and it doesn't mean you were related to them. It's just that people might have swapped or purchased those. So you can see here that they are getting more elaborate advertising for the studio on the back of the cards. So Bishop Osborne in Hobart Town, and then Stewart and Co in Melbourne, they were very prolific producers of these. So yes, that collecting of these little photos was called cartomania. And of course, like people in England would have them taken, or people in Australia, and then that's sent to families back home, that sort of thing. So here you can see some of the decorative trade plates on the back. So you'd have logos of scrolls, leaves, plants, umbrellas, birds, fans, artists' palettes. And these are all sorts of things that they use on the back of their photos to advertise their business. So Baroni and Latimer, Baroni and Co and Latimer, so on the left and the right, you can see we've got fans and umbrellas, plants, that sort of thing. So yeah, I'm quite interested in the backs of the cards more than the front. So on Latimer he states he's a photo art studio, so they did have very fancy names, and because they did a lot of hand colouring, so there was that artistic side to it as well. So often they would advertise if they had won awards in international competitions on the back of their cards. So here is a cabinet card. So they were introduced early, 1866, but they didn't really become so popular till the 1870s and 1880s. So yeah, they're bigger, 16.5 times 11.5. So by the late 1880s is when they started to outsell the carte de visites. So having a bigger photo, obviously they're a little bit more expensive. So once again, they were photos that were always adhered to a piece of card, a piece of thick card. So I don't know if people have seen these sorts of photos. Yeah, the card's a few millimetres thick. So you would get 2 cabinet card photos on one standard glass plate. Often they just had the studio name on the bottom, like this one. And this is my great whatever grandfather. Luckily he wrote on the side, taken in 1887, and he was 21 years of age. So that was nice that he wrote something. And his elaborate jumper is a Salvation Army symbol. He was in the Salvation Army. So yeah, there's a kind of an S in the middle. Oh, Blood and Fire, that's that logo that you can see around there. So yeah, hand-coloured photograph, of course. So we have quite a few cabinet cards in my family, but we have no carte de visites. I don't know, do other people have family photos that are carte de visite size or cabinet card size? Because I've only got the bigger ones. Yeah, okay. So yeah, I just assumed maybe the family was too poor when the carte de visites first came out, and they didn't get them until... Because, of course, back then everyone went to a studio. People didn't have cameras and do it all themselves. So here we have 2 nice ladies. So you'd have the oval, you'd have all sorts of decorative effects, and of course the studio had all sorts of painted scenery behind, like a hay bale. They'd have fences, they had all sorts of stuff. But they were called cabinet cards because the card was quite thick, and people would actually, they often had display cabinets there with their best china or whatever, and they would put these cards in the cabinets as well with the best china and the like. So that's how they got the name cabinet card. So yes, here we have a couple of men. The one on the right is an ancestor of mine. He looks like maybe he's holding an accordion. Yes, the rustic look, the rustic gaits. Yeah, so they just, and depending on the fashion of the time, what they had in the studio. So there was many studios in Melbourne producing cartes de visite, then cabinet cards from 1860s. So here we have Burroughs and Berman's. And as I said, photographers often move their premises. And this change of address would help to date the photograph. And then you can also look at what clothes they're wearing, that sort of thing, to help date these photographs. Because people just didn't write enough on the back to tell you who it was and what date it was taking. Yeah, exactly. So occasionally you get them with a date on the back, but not always a name, or just a name and no date. So people are always interested in finding out when they date from. So Stewart and Co. opened the studio, Richard Stewart, in 1871. By 1887 he had over 50 employees, 4 studios and 6 operators. So the photographers themselves were called operators. Then you had other people who would paste it onto the card or hand colour it, that sort of thing. So actually, Tom Roberts worked as an operator at Stewart's, the famous artist. He started off working as a photographer at Stewart & Co. in Melbourne. He worked there for quite a time, and then he was part-time work when he needed to supplement his art income. So it's interesting to see where even an artist might have started off working in these places. So Yeoman and Co. So here they were at different addresses. Emerald Hill, which is now what? South Melbourne. Then they were in North Melbourne, then they were in Parry. But sometimes they open a couple of different shops as well. Johnson and O'Shaughnessy, they started in 1862 as Johnson and Co. In 1864 changed to Johnson and O'Shaughnessy, and actually I think O'Shaughnessy was a woman. So Johnson was considered one of the leading portrait photographers in Melbourne in the 1870s and 1880s. And he was the first photographer in Australia to be granted royal patronage. So here they're listed at 3 Burke Street, but they were actually located there from 1865 to 1886 for a long time. So Claremont and Co. They had a studio in Sydney as well as Melbourne. So yes, note their very attractive trade plate on the one on the right. Yes, very, very nicely logo. So they've got both their Sydney and Melbourne address on the back of those cards. And J.W. Lindt, John William Lindt, was born in Germany in 1845. When he came to Australia, he first worked in country towns in New South Wales. He moved to Melbourne in 1876. He was known as the rich man's photographer. He took photos of the wealthy in front of their homes or carriages. He also took family groups, usually informally on their lawns of their houses. In 1885, he travelled to New Guinea on an expedition, and the photos he took there are now considered to be of cultural significance. So I guess taking tribes, people there, perhaps before it was commonly done and before too much white influence. So the photos that were taken as these carte de visite and cabinet cards were usually albumen photos. So albumen was the method to print the photos from around 1850 to 1900. So albumen used egg white as the binder, and of course egg white with silver to hold the image in place. So yeah, most of the ones you see will be albumen. And they were always, these albumen photos were printed on thin card. That's why they were always stuck on thicker card, because the thin card would just curl up if it wasn't stuck on something thicker. So if you see them not on a card, they'll just be curled up. So albums. So many types of albums, as of course people were collecting them, they wanted albums to put them in. I've only brought my small albums, but yeah, I've got lots of bigger ones as well. So first of all, you'd have the albums just to hold the cartes de visite, the small ones, and then when both of them were well in production, you'd have albums which would hold both. So they'd have a section with all apertures for the carte de visite, and then bigger apertures for the cabinet cards, so you could put them both into one album. And you can see they had the very decorative covers, like they were quite similar to maybe the Bible covers, probably a similar size, with a lot of gold tooling work. So really, really nice. So yeah, you can get covers in all sorts with pearl work, carved wood, Japanese lacquer, velvet, tooled leather. And so these leather-bound albums were the most popular. So here's a couple more with gold tooling decoration. So you can see that green one is doesn't show up so well, but colour, but it's green on the left. And then on the right, I don't know if it's Windsor Castle, I think it might be. But yeah, very, very decorative. And they'd have clasps on the front, like these have got little clasps, but often they're, on these albums they're broken off. But they'd have little clasps like that. So yes, who can do gold tooling that good? Anyone? So here we have embossed covers. So the one on the left is quite padded, so it's got some sort of filler underneath for that padding, and a decorative design on it. And then the one on the right just had that all over embossed design, which was really, really nice. Then this has got a velvet cover. So, of course, patches of the velvet have worn off the top. But yeah, you can see it's a really lovely blue velvet album, which I think I picked up at a market somewhere. So here, as I said, the album clasps, often they're broken or missing. And they usually made them quite tight, so once you put all your photos in, it was hard to close them. So this is why they often broke off, because even to close this one, you put photos in there and it's really, you've really got to push it down. So this is why they always broke off. They kind of needed to leave a bit more, make the clasps a bit bigger, so they weren't so tight. So there's an American cabinet card album, and it just takes cabinet cards, not the smaller carte de visites. So here in the albums you'd have these maybe the first 5 or 10 pages you'd have these very decorative effects around on the page, around the where you put the photo. So lots of, all these pre-cut apertures, and you push the photo up. And doing that, you'd often tear around that slot if you're not careful. But yeah, very decorative. So here we've got flowers and birds. But you can see other pages, they're just plain around the aperture. But look at that, a little cyclamen, everything. But yeah, a lot of the pages would be plain, but then you'd have some of these decorative pages. So, although they had very beautiful covers of leather or velvet or the like, the paper used in the album is quite poor quality, and so it gets quite brittle over time, it tears easily. That's why these apertures, all the ones you see, usually have a lot of tears on those aperture openings. But then, covers come off and all that sort of stuff as well. But, they are 150 years old, so I guess, and if people took photos out and pushed them back in, that's when they'd tear them. So here we have some nice floral designs with orchids, scenery. Yes, very, very decorative. So here we have bouquets of flowers and scenes of castles in the background at the bottom. So yes, there's your ancestor sitting amongst the flowers. So here's a nice historical album I have. Memorial of England's Glories. It's just the weirdest album ever. So the images on the pages are quite different. So here we have this on the right side. We have Queen Elizabeth I with a naval battle illustrated. So here they are sitting on the page of a naval battle. William the Conqueror's, oh no, that's the next one, is it? Yeah, I'm just like, that's bizarre, isn't it, having a picture there? Here we have William the Conqueror, and your ancestors can sit on the page with them. It says Battle of Hastings at the top, 1066. So yeah, it's really, really funny. Here we have Henry V, Adrian Court, you know, a nice dead people laying down there. So 14, 15, is it? Yeah, I just find it really, really funny, this album. Wellington at Waterloo. You'd think those little ones at the top, oh no, they're not their photos. There's Wellington or whoever else. But yeah, I just find it strange putting your photos in the album with scenes of battles or all that sort of thing. So often you may have your photos loose, they may not be in any album, and so I do have, on the bottom left you can see I have found some sleeves that fit those cut de visites in, but they're just an odd sort of size that don't fit in most sleeves, but I have got some. But otherwise, I tend to put them, if they're not in an album, I put them in little poly bags, just to protect them if I've just got them in a box or whatever. And then some of them I put in albums. So yeah, if they're not in one of these type of albums, I put them in polypropylene sleeves in the album. It's a good way to store them. And then, as you can see, I make boxes to store most of the albums. And some of them, they've got the covers half off or the spine coming off. And I am going to repair them one day when I have time. So, yeah, so basically that's it. So, yeah, boxes are good, especially to protect the leather from light and insects and that sort of thing. So, basically that's it. Did people have questions or not? Or come up and have a look at these ones with the famous people. So, yeah. If you want anything repaired, you can come to me as well.